with the most intellectuals of the present day, including like Dr. Deepak Chopra and Rick Archer, and most recently was with David Chalmers. So for David Chalmers, for the Center for Consciousness Studies, play a very important role because it was the David Chalmers who coined hard problem of consciousness, where all the academia is trying to understand what hard problem of consciousness is. So when I was listening the live interaction with David Chalmers, a new word was coined, was it, bit and chip, probably with that, which came very spontaneously, and today we know in his YouTube, it, bit and chip is a very largely followed thing. And also he has been invited with the World Parliament of Religions in Toronto, and also in the United Nations headquarters at New York. So with this brief introducing Swamiji, and just a thought came to me now. We remember that the Center for Consciousness Studies, even though it was started here earlier, but the foundation was laid in late 1980s by Dr. T. Desirajan. At that point of time, in the archives of our department, I found a photo where there was an International Center for International Conference on Consciousness, where Swami Sarvapriyananda was one of the speakers. So we are, from the neuroscience perspective, now we are following the same legacy. And Sarvapriyanji, he's been tutored and mentored by Ranganathanji himself in his formative years. He is also following the same legacy. So we are here in the same place where we are here to listen to Swamiji now. Swamiji, this for you.
I'll start with a chant. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityur Ma Amritam Gamaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. I was just thinking, I'm the one who's fortunate to be here. I remember when I became a monk, just about 2 days, the ashram where I had joined the order, I was a new brahmachari, absolutely a newcomer to the order. And the Swami introduced me to the teachers. It was a school, a Ramakrishna Mission school. And he introduced me to the teachers. This boy has come to become a monk. He has got these qualifications. One of the teachers said, "Oh, so we are so lucky to have him." And immediately the monk corrected him and said, "No, he is lucky to be here." And I've always had that attitude in life. And when I look at this institute and the very distinguished gathering here on the days and off the days, I feel I'm very fortunate that I'm able to come here and discuss this most important subject in this most elite of institutes. What can Indian philosophy, what insights can Indian philosophy give to neuroscience in the study of consciousness? Well, straight off, I can give you one example right now, which happened just now. As I was entering the administrative block, there was a poster which said an exhibition on obsessive compulsive disorder. And from a Vedantic perspective, immediately, what struck me was, when you talk about something like OCD, you see on one hand behavior, which is the OCD, behavior characteristic of OCD. Now, if you ask that the patient to report what he or she is feeling, so they'll give a personal report, a first-person account of what it feels like to be under the grip of this compulsive behavior. So how do we deal with it normally? From a psychiatric perspective, what you deal with is the behavior that has to be treated, and you talk with the person, you say that is the subject, and this is the objective behavior, the observed behavior. And that's it. But from a Vedantic perspective, what difference does it make? Here's an insight. From a Vedantic perspective, both of them are objects. The behavior is objective, it's observed. But even the experience of being in the grips of OCD, which that person is reporting and which you would normally treat as a subjective report, is also an object, because that person is experiencing it. What's the definition of a subject? What's the definition of an object? In Vedanta, whatever is experienced is an object. Whatever is an object of experience. I love this definition by Professor Arindam Chakravarti. He teaches Indian philosophy at Hawaii. He was in New York a couple of years back. He said, definition of an object, anything that objects to your consciousness is an object. Think of your consciousness as a field spreading out. Now when it encounters an object, something like this, you see this. So when you say you see this, consciousness experiencing an object, then you have the experience of seeing. Consciousness plus object is equal to experience from a Vedantic perspective. What are these objects? They're physical objects like this, or objects like the OCD behavior, or objects, mental objects, which we do not see, but each of us has an inner first-person world. And we have those experiences. So I'm most grateful, Dr. Murthy, other distinguished faculty members on the dais, members of the faculty, students, staff, and so many guests from Bangalore and outside Bangalore. I'm glad that you have come here this afternoon. We'll spend some time together deliberating these very profound issues. It was not always so. I had this very interesting experience a couple of weeks back. I got an invitation from a very powerful body in the United States, the American Psychiatric Association, APA. And the invitation was interesting. The APA wants a conference with spiritual leaders, with leaders of religious organizations. So I was the token representative from Hinduism, but they were mostly representatives from different churches, from Islam, from Judaism. And the idea there was that there's a mental health crisis. They're talking about the United States, but India also. And it is impossible for us as psychiatrists to deal with it alone. And we find that another player in this whole field is religion. And often, he's talking about the United States, often we find people who come to us, they don't really like us, they don't really trust us, but they like the pastor or the minister in the church, the head of the local religious organization. They're more trusted, somebody they can talk with, especially in cases of mental illness. So we should have a partnership. Now, we were surprised because we thought Americans, so there are these two organizations. I mean, I'm talking to people who are experts in the field, two APAs, and I got confused. There's the American Psychiatric Association, American Psychology Association, and they hate each other. Yes. And they both have enormous headquarters buildings near each other in Washington, D.C. So I got confused actually. Luckily in time I found out which was the one which I had invited. But the case they made for engagement with spirituality was, you cannot argue with the data. They said, it's not that we are going to come out as religious people or spiritual people and start supporting religion, philosophy. No. We may or may not believe in all this. But we cannot argue with the data. Every survey shows that those who have some grounding in, some personal grounding in some religious faith, some kind of regular practice of their own, they are much more resilient when it comes to mental illness. There are much less incidence of mental illness, and also when there is mental illness, often, on the average again, resilience is more. They can handle it better. So you can't argue with the data. That's why we want a cooperation. And even more interesting, I'm just sharing it, I'm sure he won't mind. The ex-president of the American Psychiatric Association, Samar Garg, I think, after lunch, because he saw this dress, he came and told me that, as a young man, I spent 3 years in a Buddhist monastery in Japan. And even till today, I meditate daily. I meditate daily. Who is this? Psychiatrist in America. They have the reputation of pill pushers. No meditation, philosophy, just take this medicine, you'll be fine. He is saying that I meditate every day. And I really feel that the way to go forward in psychiatry is this bridge between our ancient spiritual traditions of all religions and psychiatry. So I'm very glad that we have this. And this institute, as I was just hearing from the director ma'am, she was saying how the philosophy is that we are open in this institute to the ancient spiritual heritage of India, and try to understand these problems from this kind of synthetic perspective. The reason really why we are here today is, as Dr. Ravindra mentioned, it's the hard problem of consciousness. And the hard problem of consciousness is why today I'm a monk, I'm a Vedantist. Here you are psychiatrist, neuroscientist, various range of disciplines. Why are we talking at all? It's because of this. What this problem is, it's been understood for quite a long time. But it is only in recent times it's taken on a life of its own. It got the catchy formulation, the hard problem of consciousness. Professor David Chalmers, who is the head of the Mind-Brain Consciousness Unit department in NYU. NYU, by the way, has probably the best philosophy of mind faculty in the philosophy department worldwide, so it's there. What he said was, notice that we all have experiences of the world. We are continuously having experiences, and this is what we call our lives. At the same time, when we look at our body and the brain, nervous system, it's matter. It's observable processes going on there. I mean, you can observe it as a living tissue. You can observe even with our modern technology, you can observe the minute electrical activity in the neurons. But that's the limit of what we can see. And by the way, it's, I think, one of the reasons why there's a renewed interest in consciousness, and this right now why this is such a hot subject, also technology. Two sides of it. The new imaging technology which has come into play, that's one reason. And another reason is, I think, IT, information technology, the possibility of AI. There are people in IBM, a senior researcher, was asking me questions about the viability of AI and consciousness. Can AI be conscious? And what is consciousness from an Indian perspective? The problem is this, as David Chalmers has put it, we see minute electrical activity. That's literally the last thing that can be observed by our most advanced scanning mechanisms, fMRI scans or whatever, you know better. And yet, each of us, we have this vivid experience going on right now. You can see color and shape and such complexity in our field of vision. You can hear sound, music, harsh noises, melodious stuff, all of this we can hear. We taste, we smell, we touch. Not only that, we have the inner introspective experience of thinking, remembering, desiring, hating, all of what we call our life. In fact, one of the leading neuroscientists, Christoph Koch, who was in the Paul Allen Brain Institute, one of his latest book is The Feeling of Life Itself. He defines consciousness as the feeling of life itself, which all of us we have. Now there is a huge bridge, minute bursts of electricity, and compare it with the experience each of us is having right now. When I'm seeing you, when I'm hearing you, when I'm thinking, feeling, these are not minute bursts of electricity. It's color and shape, a direct first-person experience. And when you look at from externally, when you look at the what's going on, the electrical activity in the brain, that's not seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, desiring, thinking, understanding, hating, inspiration, creativity. No. You see, one must appreciate the huge explanatory gap here. One might say right here, what's the problem? Those bursts of electricity are causing it. Right? From a Vedantic perspective, this is a huge, what we might call a category error. Why is it a category error? Once, I was talking with another philosopher, and he's a biologist, Massimo. He teaches at, I think, at City College in New York, I think, or City University of New York, CUNY. So he's a biologist and a neuroscientist also, a biologist and a philosopher of mind. And he said, look, I'm convinced that consciousness is nothing but something that is produced by a living brain. That's it. And he says, I cannot explain it yet. He admits the gap, the explanatory gap between minute electrical activity observed in a living brain, in the tissues of a living brain, and our vivid experience of life. How is it, how are the two connected? He says, I cannot explain it yet. But his argument was, look, this gap, it's not a big deal, because even 100 years back, people were saying that you cannot explain life. Science cannot explain life. But today, we understand life down to its molecular level. The molecular processes which go to constitute what we call life. We understand that now. And for me, that's enough explanation. So give us time. Us means neuroscientists. Give us time, and we will explain how consciousness is produced from physical processes in a living brain. So this is called promissory materialism. I can't, it's a real thing. If you Google it, you will find it. No, it's a really big thing. Promissory materialism. I can't explain it now, but I will be able to explain it later. Just give me some more time. For the time being, you must accept that somehow physical processes produce consciousness. Now, what could be the objection against this? The objection from a Vedantic perspective, there's a huge objection. Here is the objection. And these are insights actually we can share in the dialogue. Why is promissory materialism not acceptable? Because of this. I said, my reply to him was, look, when you say, I have now understood life in terms of more fundamental processes. Life is a complex, higher order process, and you reduce it down to more fundamental processes, down to the cellular level, down to even to the molecular level, as you have said. Great. From an Advaitic perspective, what have you done? You have understood a complex, objective process in terms of more fundamental, objective processes. Remember, what's the definition of object in Vedanta? Anything that is experienced in consciousness, that is presented to consciousness, is an object. Whatever you can experience is an object. It could be something external, it could be something mental also. These are all objects. Life is an objective process. Molecular processes you find in experimentation and observation, these are objective processes. That you have explained in terms of this. But now when you say, I am going to explain consciousness, which is not an objective process, we will see why not, is not an objective process in terms of objective processes, then you see, you're making a jump. You're making what can be called in philosophy a category error. He did not take it well. I mean, either he didn't get what I was trying to say, or it's not a valid thing. Now remember, we must keep our minds open. As neuroscientists are keeping their minds open, explanations from Vedanta, Buddhism, all of these traditions, interesting, let's hear them out. From our perspective also, it should not be a done deal. Remember, in Indian philosophy also, there's a whole range of views on consciousness. There is the Nyaya Vaisheshika view of consciousness, very different from the Advaita view of consciousness. Though if you go deeper into it, it's not so different at all. There is the Sankhya view of consciousness and the Advaita view of consciousness. There are various schools of Buddhism with various grades of understanding of consciousness. The Jaina idea of consciousness. So in ancient Indian philosophical discourse, there was this whole spectrum of views of consciousness. I mean, it's very tempting to give a very neat idea that this is the ancient Indian understanding of consciousness, and here is what we can share with modern science. No, it's not all that neat. It's much more messy than that, but it's much more interesting also. It's much more interesting. I remember reading a paper by Patricia Churchland, and she says that philosophy of mind is not the way to understand the mystery of consciousness. We are doing neuroscience, we need to keep on doing more neuroscience, and one day we will understand the mystery of consciousness. This is again promissory materialism. I don't agree. It's not. Now, this has to be taken carefully. So is it that doing more neuroscience is not necessary? It is necessary. First of all, we live in an age of science. We would be doing less than justice to our own philosophical traditions if we are not open to science. I'm sure the great masters of the Advaita tradition, whether it is Shankara or, and this is the land of Vidyaranya, the author of the Panchadashi, or so many others, the kind of mind that you see working in those texts, if they were here today, they would be completely engaged with science. They would be very happy to take insights from science and investigate the scientific approach. So even to understand our ancient philosophical spiritual traditions, we must engage with science. And the other way around, there is something that I firmly believe that these philosophical schools, especially Advaita Vedanta, can help in the investigation into consciousness. So both ways. But why is it that I said that I don't think further investigation in neuroscience will actually solve the mystery of consciousness in the sense that we will be able to explain it from matter to consciousness? That is, I'm reminded of a little quote from Ed Witten. He is in Princeton. He's a string theorist, not a neuroscientist, not a Vedantist or philosopher. He's a string theorist, but a brilliant man nevertheless. And some interview I was watching, and there, quite off the topic, it's not something related to physics. Somebody asked, what about the mystery of consciousness? So do you think by neuroscience we'll solve the mystery of consciousness? And he made a very perceptive remark. This is somebody, a very intelligent, powerful, intelligent mind from outside the field. Neither philosophy nor neuroscience. From outside the field, a powerful, intelligent mind observing this, and he says, I think as we do more neuroscience, we will learn more and more about the brain. But consciousness will still remain a mystery. So this observation is actually the basis of this dialogue which we are having. I feel with the traditions we have in India for centuries, millennia of investigation into consciousness, and the new booming interest in consciousness studies, in brain science, in computer science, in the philosophy of mind, we are at a very exciting time. We will get new powerful understandings, theoretical as well of something of practical use also, I think. Just like the American Psychiatric Association feels that a partnership between spirituality and psychiatry can be very helpful. I was reading this book by Evan Thompson. He's a professor of philosophy at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. And he's written this book, Waking, Dreaming, Being, Consciousness from Modern Neuroscience and Vedantic and Buddhist Perspectives. In the very beginning, he says, consciousness studies is not a new field. It's a very ancient field. It goes all the way back to the Upanishads of India. 5,000 years ago, they were the first people to investigate consciousness, and they reached